Should coaching be allowed in professional tennis? See, if I was acting in my best self-interest, I would say yes. But since I'm an honest guy and I always tell you guys the truth, my opinion on coaching in professional tennis is that it absolutely should not be allowed. And there are several reasons why I'm saying that it shouldn't be allowed. And let's start off with the fact that if we would allow coaching to take place in professional tennis, it would make the players look bad. It would make them look bad from a mental standpoint. It would make them look bad from a tactical and technical standpoint. It would be as if the players were not good enough in those areas of the game to figure it out on their own. And the truth is that this is absolutely not the case. We have seen some of the greatest players in the history of tennis. Just think of the big three. I don't think we're going to see players like that in many, many years to come. The same can be said for the WTA, where we had some of the greatest legends play the game, such as Steffi Graf, Serena Williams, Martina Navratilova, or Chris Evert. And these fantastic players have been able to figure it out on their own on the court. They did not rely on coaching. So now all of a sudden, it would be as if the players that are coming up, the new generation of players, is somehow unable to do it on their own. It would make them look as if they were weak mentally, tactically, and technically. So for that reason, in my opinion, coaching in professional tennis should absolutely not be allowed. Now, do I think these players need coaching? Are they somehow inferior to the players of the past? I don't think so at all. These are fantastic players that are coming up on both the WTA and the ATP Tour. And it's just going to be tough to repeat the results of some of the greatest players of all time. But when it comes to all the things that I mentioned before, the mental, the tactical, and the technical standpoint of tennis, these players are at the elite level and are capable enough to figure this out on their own. They do not require coaching in a match in order to perform better. Now, another reason why I think coaching should not be allowed is that it would be incredibly unfair if coaching worked. We're going to get to that later. It's a big if whether coaching is effective anyway, but let's just say it was effective. It would be unbelievably unfair because players who are ranked higher, who make more money, could obviously be able to afford better coaches than players who are ranked lower, and players who are ranked really low might not be able to afford a coach at all. Another reason why coaching should not be allowed is because it has very limited impact on a player's performance if the coaching is done inside of a match, and I'm going to explain it in a little bit more detail. So what happens a lot of times when players would call a coach, it would usually be in situations when they're down. Let's say they get broken in a set, or they just lose a really tight set, and then they say, hey coach, can you come down and help me out? But since I have been a player and have coached many players, those type of circumstances where the player is incredibly angry and frustrated, no matter what the coach tells that player, it has very limited to no effect, because players are overwhelmed with emotions at that particular stage or stages in a match that it really doesn't matter who comes on the court. It's going to be really tough for them to get out of the funk. And what's going to get them out of the funk is their mental strength, and it's not dependent on what the coach is going to tell them. They're going to have to go through the motions. They're going to have to continue to play and try to figure it out on their own, try to fight their demons like Novak Djokovic does and Rafael Nadal does, or even Roger Federer. They're going to have to figure out how to turn the match around in their favor, and it's something that's not easy to do. It sometimes might be impossible to do, because often when you're in a funk, not only are you in a terrible state of mind, but your opponent all of a sudden is in a great state of mind. So you're fighting those two things, and it's very difficult to turn those situations around. Now, interestingly, let's say you get broken in a really important part of the match, and then rain starts falling and there's a big break, let's say a 2-hour break, and you get to talk to your coach in that 2-hour break. That's a completely different scenario, and that's where coaching can have an effect, because the player will have time to calm down, to settle themselves, and then they can actually start listening to the coach, and maybe once they get back on the court, they can perform a lot better. One famous example of that was when Agassi won the French Open. He was down 2-0 against Medvedev, the old Medvedev, that's Andre Medvedev, and there was a rain delay, and Andre had the chance to talk to Brett Gilbert in the locker rooms, and he came out and won the next 3 sets and won the French Open. And Andre contributes the fact that he won on that rain delay. Now, I made 2 videos that are really interesting, and they relate to what I'm talking about, that coaches have very limited effect on their players' performances inside of a match. And these 2 videos are Alec and Wellington, two of my students, playing sets against each other, and I highly recommend that you watch both of these videos. So in the first video, you see Alec playing really well and dominating Wellington. And in the second video, you will see me coaching Wellington after he had lost the first set. And Wellington was really nervous. He knew he was being recorded and he was potentially going to be seen by tens of thousands of people, so he was super tight. And no matter what I was telling Wellington between the points, I couldn't get rid of his tightness. And I tried really hard to help him, but the only way Wellington was going to be able to turn that match around if he fought with his own demons. Because if you watch this match, you will see how nervous and jerky and how hectic he was between the points. He wasn't even listening to what I was telling him. He was so tight and in this horrible state of mind that the only way he could get rid of that is to deal with these demons by himself. So look guys, I'm honest enough to tell you that my on the court coaching with Wellington had very little to almost no effect whatsoever. He lost that second set 6-1. But I do believe that coaching obviously is super useful for the player, because I went out with Wellington afterwards and we worked on some of the things that he did wrong in a match. But this is what makes tennis so challenging, because practice and match are two different things. And in a match, the emotions are going to be a lot higher, the stakes are a lot higher, and this is where the mind can play tricks on you. And this is why it's so important that the player needs to figure out how to solve these problems by themselves. And lastly, and most importantly, some people are of the belief that if we added match coaching, that this would add a lot of excitement to tennis. And I do not believe that this is the case. Why? Because the WTA had match coaching. And now, interestingly, because of COVID, they got rid of it, and nobody seems to remember that it was allowed in the first place, and nobody seems to care that it's gone. Now, I was watching the WTA coaching very closely, and I can tell you why it wasn't a big hit. And here is what would most commonly happen. The players would call the coach, like I mentioned before, in really bad situations in the match. They just got broken, they just lost the set, and they're way down in the score. And now the player would be sitting on a bench like this, looking forward. And now the coach would come down, and usually they would rattle off an insane amount of tactical and technical instructions. And it was as if the player wasn't even listening. They had this blank stare on their face, looking forward, and it seemed like the instructions were going in one ear and out the other. And of course, this doesn't apply to everyone. I have seen some good coaching, and I have seen some players who were engaged and were communicating with the coach quite well. However, the vast majority of cases that I was able to observe, not only did the player not focus on what the coach was telling them, but the coaching didn't have any effect on the outcome of the match. In other words, the player would call the coach down when they were way down in the score, and the fact that they were allowed to call the coach to the bench, it didn't help them turn the score around and win the match. So guys, in addition to all the things that I mentioned before, I think it's really important that we keep the tradition of tennis alive, which is that it's truly an individual sport. If you compare tennis to some other individual sports where coaching is allowed, tennis differentiates from those sports, and I think it's super important that we preserve this tradition because it makes tennis truly unique. And guys, I'm going to finish off this video with the most important reason why coaching should never be allowed in tennis, and that is the following quote from the GOAT, Roger Federer.